guys. I have not stood in front of you all and taught in a really, really long time. And so some of you are just not used to hearing my voice in front of you all. And I'm not used to speaking like this. So bear with me. I'm still very excited though to share with you guys, mostly because of this sermon series that we're doing, The Shepherd, and talking about Psalm 23. And it's like one of my favorites. And so there was like lots of things I could teach on today. And this might not have been what we even discussed as a team for me to teach on, but it's probably more what I'm going through currently and things that I need to hear pretty badly today. So I hope that you just bear with me and you get something out of it as well. But I know that this is what God's speaking to me. So as we get started, even that last song, like, what more could I want? It kind of comes to my favorite line in like probably the entire Bible is Psalm 23:1. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or maybe your version says like, I have all that I need, which is another version that I love. And there's just something about things that are a promise that all of our wants are going to be wrapped up in it. Like, is there anything more motivating than like this carrot of like ultimate satisfaction? It's kind of like what our souls are created craving, and we always want for more. And then there's this promise in this like thousands-year-old book that there is a place where you can go and not want anymore and not have need still, to kind of escape this constant craving that we have. And that, to me, that's like, yes, this is where I want to camp out, even in these 6 verses. This is all that I want. And so that's what's drawn me back to this chapter specifically, again and again, year after year, which I don't know if you knew this, but I think in like generations past, Psalm 23 was like a death chapter. Like, this is what we read to people as they were on their deathbed, because it talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And so it was so comforting in those last moments. And I think when I heard that when I was younger, I was like, oh, that's so like dark. I think this is like life-giving, and this is exciting for life. And so I want to redeem that and take that back from that. Yes, there's like so much promise and sweetness for our last days, that they're just more opportunity to walk with Jesus into his presence. But there's also this really sweet thing, because this is a psalm written by David, who got to do all of these amazing things, also a lot of terrible things. God really used him. But he spent a lot of years in the fields learning as a shepherd, learning what it's like to be cared for by a shepherd, the amount of love that a shepherd has for his sheep, the responsibility that he feels, that literally like a good shepherd, like one that's actually good at his job, would lay down his own life to save a sheep. And you might think that's stupid, right? We're like, it's an animal versus a person, plus you probably more than one, so like balance out the value system doesn't make sense. And that's exactly what David said that he would do. You know, he would kill a bear or a lion that came to attack his sheep. He literally risking his own life. It probably would have been much safer if he just ran for it and left the sheep for dead. But that's what a good shepherd does. And then we get to hear Jesus in John 10 talk about how he is the good shepherd. So we're kind of going to bounce back and forth between John 10 and Psalm 23. But it's this amazing thing, like Chandler talked about last week. Not that many of us know that much about shepherds or have a lot of experience with it, but it's one of those analogies that God brings back, that Jesus talks about specifically. And I think it's almost like it's sweet that it's foreign to us, because we just get to learn it through how Jesus taught it to us. We don't have our own understanding. Sometimes even like the analogy of God as a father is like one that's got baggage and pain with it. This one comes fresh. Like, you don't have like shepherd pains in your life, hopefully, or like scars from your experiences with the shepherds. So instead, we get to come and be invited to be shepherds, and we don't get to have like a whole lot of like baggage against being called a sheep or anything like that. So if you guys want to turn to John 10, to me, the ultimate motivation is that the sheep that are described, that get to be a part of this fold in Psalm 23, are so well taken care of through all of the things that I know that I face, that I know I want to go there. How do I get to be those people? How do I get to be cared for that way? And it's also in John, but in John chapter 1, verse 12, he says, the writer of John says, Turning. There we go. 1:12, he says, or I'll start in verse 9. The true light which gives light to everyone was coming to the world, this being Jesus. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. But everything, how real is that? That Jesus is true light for us. He came for the entire world, but then this thing that we so badly crave, I think we just, we brush past it. We don't recognize it for what it is. And I think that's what I want to talk about today, stopping and recognizing and receiving so that we get to be called sheep like this. The world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. And here in verse 12, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. That children of God, another analogy of what we get to be called, or even if we saw it as we get to be called sheep in his sheepfold. It's as simple as receiving, but we're not born in that. Actually, because of our sin nature, we're enemies to God, and he just made this grand gesture over Easter towards us that said, you have a choice. You can accept or reject me, but if you accept me, this is who I promise to be, and it's John 10. We'll just start in verse 3. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. There's a side note. I don't know if any of you have watched The Chosen. I highly recommend it, but not because this guy is a perfect picture of Jesus or anything like that, but I think one thing that the actor really portrays really well is the moments that it's like they're chosen moments when he calls someone by name. He calls Matthew, he calls Peter, and every time I see it, I want to weep also, because I'm like, oh, there's eyes looking at a camera, but that's Jesus looked at me and he called me by name. And I think we forget that personal part of it, or maybe you haven't had that personal experience, just to know that, or just sit in that for a second right now, to know that Jesus knows you and calls you by name, and that's why you get to be a part of this sheepfold. That's why all of this matters, because he thought of you when he died, and he knew your name. He makes eye contact with you, and he calls you to be his. So he knew them by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, and they did not understand what he was saying to them. More people that rejected him. Sometimes things in the Bible, they start to sound like foolishness to us, and how often that Jesus would go and speak in kind of cryptic ways and parables, and the crowds would not understand, and then he would pull a few people aside and explain what he was saying. So in verse 7, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And this is where we're going to start from. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Going on to verse 14, I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. This is the shepherd that we get to be shepherded by, but it's a choice that we make. And that's where I want to start with. To be a sheep, it's a choice that you get to have to either accept or reject him. And maybe that's one that you've already made, but I want to invite you, even in this moment, to take a little second and think about, if you had the choice right now, would you accept this identity, to be able to be put in a position where you could call the Lord your shepherd, not just he's Lord of my life, he's God, and I bow reverence on Sundays because he's worthy, but he's not personal, but this good shepherd that Jesus describes himself as is personal. I'm not good at grammar. Pronoun? No, I don't know. My? What's my? Okay, yes. My is personal, right? It's not the shepherd, like we say, the God. How often do you describe my Jesus or my God? That's kind of a really weird, not really weird. If you talk that way, that's beautiful, and I'm envious of that. But that's not the way that we tend to talk about Jesus. It's impersonal, and he's far away. the difference between saying someone's like my president or the president, depending on what party you are and what year it is. It's my president or it's the president. And I think it's the same thing. This kind of shepherd is my shepherd. He gets to be your shepherd if you choose to so make him that. So in accepting or rejecting, but in accepting him, we get to have this kind of shepherd and sheep relationship. And this is the one that I want to challenge you, that is the best relationship or identity or place to be found in. It's the place where there's no wanting. It's the place where everything is taken care of and we still face all of the crap of life, all of the hardship and trials, but it's one that's promised to be without want. And I don't know about you, but to explain why this is important to me in this season, it just feels like Chandler was kind of talking about it, like things are starting to come back, or like we're having little conversations about like actually what you might do for the summer or what you need to do even like next week when you actually go to school for full days every day of the week, or work starts to become more. And I've just gotten to this like, oh no, like there's a snowball that's starting and it's turning into an avalanche and I don't really feel like ready for this. Like I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. I feel like it's already more than I can handle and we haven't even started yet. And I don't know if you are like me in that same kind of like caught up with too much. And it comes kind of back to David. He was called and anointed as the king of Israel when he was like 14 years old, but he wasn't actually crowned king or came into authority for years. And I just imagine him at 14, called in from the fields, and then going like, you're gonna be the king of your entire nation. And at 14, that's definitely overwhelming. That's definitely more than you can wrap your mind around, and even in God's goodness, he gave him time to process that whole thing, to teach him, to actually show him how to be a good shepherd, the importance of sheep and how to care for them. And I think this is where Psalm 23 came out of, is that season where David was off, kind of in a waiting season, preparing for what God was calling him to, and this is what God brought out of it. And I think for myself, it's that same thing that I'm seeing David learn. It's just start with the simple things. So I want to invite us all to start with those simple things. Start, like, if being a sheep sounds very simple, let's just start with really simple things. It's being and then going and doing. I get so caught up in all the things that I need to do. And Chris just gave a sermon last week about, like, it's not about doing to then prove that you are something. First, let's just be sheep. And then we can go and do the things that the shepherd does as we follow him. But first, just be sheep. Just like John says, to just let him know us and to know him, to accept him, not reject him. So first point, how to be a sheep would be to be so dependent on the shepherd, you're as good as dead without him. I know Chandler talked a little bit about how like sheep will continue to grow hair or wool. They'll continue to grow wool endlessly until they can't see anymore, until it weighs them down and they can't walk anymore, or they can't actually eat anymore, and they'll just die without human intervention. And I think as people, we can kind of like fake our way through life, right? There's plenty of people that never know Jesus and they make it through life. They live, they breathe, they never make a nod to God, but they still are functioning humans on this planet. And we could go, I guess as humans, like we're not quite the same as sheep. We can like still survive. But if we want to be sheep that are cared for, that have all of our needs met, there is almost an acknowledgement that we are needy. That kind of steps out. We have to do something kind of brave, kind of vulnerable, and acknowledge our own need. Kind of step away from the, no one likes to claim that I'm a dependent person or like I'm a needy person. That's like kind of the worst thing. I still think, like, after years of practicing knowing that it's like okay to be needy, I still hate it every time I have to say something that feels needy. But in this way, in front of Jesus, we're actually like, that's where we start, just being so dependent in every aspect of our lives. Literally, how many things in your day do you do that you wouldn't be able to do if it weren't for Jesus in your life? If you just think about it today. Did you do anything today that you wouldn't have been able to do if it wasn't for Jesus today? that's not true? Are we even practicing this kind of dependency that the Bible says in John chapter 15 when he says, abide in me, apart from me you can do nothing. I am the vine and you are just the branches. But we live our life kind of like we're our own like root and tree and fruit plant all in itself, right? How often do we sit and just function as like an extension of what God is doing, not able to even like generate energy to do anything unless he motivates and he pushes forward? These are really challenging questions that I'm like asking myself on a daily basis, but I want to present you guys with these questions to start thinking through these things. Am I really sitting in this sheepfold, making Jesus my shepherd, where I don't do anything apart from him? That's what we claim to do as Christians. That's how we receive him initially, is to say that I have such great need that I'm going to put all my chips in on you and you get to buy my life. But then now we're facing the question on a daily basis of, do we truly live out dependency on him daily? I think a good question to ask even is, have you been killing your self-reliance or have you been celebrating it lately? It's a little bit of something that we like to pat ourselves on the back on and be like, oh yeah, I did pretty good. Like, oh, no friends showed up, but I still went and did that other thing. I'm getting pretty independent, like I can do things, or, you know, I ran out of oil and I figured out how to do it myself. I didn't have to ask my dad. Those are our favorite, like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good kind of things. And we'd like almost rather celebrate that than kind of celebrating our dependency on Jesus. Days when we feel like we don't have enough for the day and he provided just enough for us, those should be the days that we celebrate more as sheep, as celebrating him as our shepherd, getting to know him as our provider deeper. Second thing is to trust that he has given us everything that we need. I'm just going to read through Psalm 23 really quick for us, since that's where we're at today. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." This whole I shall not want, like I said, that's like my favorite thing. And I think there's a big difference, and I think God has really shown me this multiple times in my life, that there's a big difference between wants and needs. That the things that I have want of, or the things that I mix things up. I call wants needs, just like my children do when they're like, I need ice cream, you know, you're like, okay, maybe you don't need ice cream, maybe you want ice cream. But even a heart that is wanting, it comes from this like, this deep belief in our lack. And isn't that where most of our issues stem from? Either a lack of love, or a lack of talent, or a lack of time, or a lack of energy, or a lack of God's love for us, or a lack of his goodness. But then the God of the Bible, who Jesus says he is the God who comes to bring abundant life. So either he lied when he said that, or we've kind of gotten our wants and our needs confused. And I'm so guilty of that in the seasons where I feel deep dissatisfaction or frustration, where I see how things could be better or more perfect, and God still has to be good in the middle of it. And he teaches me that even in that season, the lesson that I learn or receive by trusting him, by learning patience or gentleness or grace through that season, is actually the thing that I needed all along. And all of my wants are just kind of wrapped up in him and how he cares for me and what I need. And I think just understanding that the opposite of want is not a lack of desire, especially when it comes to like, I want things in the world to look different. I want things in my life to look different. It doesn't mean that when I do not have want, that I don't have desire for them anymore. It's just trusting that the shepherd has already given everything that you need. And sometimes that's a little bit of submission to God, going, I don't get to define what I need. You made me, and you know exactly what I need. This is the thing that I try and get my kids to understand on a regular basis. The other day, Jovi was like, desperately starving as we walked around. I don't remember where we were walking around, but it was like she was literally dying by the amount of drama that was coming out of her as we walked around the store. And it's like, pretty sure we had 3 different food options for you at the house. We left a half hour ago. I'm pretty sure children that are starving are quieter than you if they're truly starving. And like, that's funny, and we can do that with little kids, but I think we might do those same things in our own lives, not to make fun of the difficulty that we go through or the heartache that we might feel in certain seasons, but to just know that God might know a little bit better how we actually function, what we truly need, maybe even how much a want might be a good thing, but not in this season, but that there's a greater lesson that you need to learn in this season, or a greater amount of character that you need to grow, and that's of greater worth to God than your current enjoyment or comfort in this season. And then this is where abiding starts to get active. Number 3 is that we follow the shepherd to places that require trust. And I think it sounds like really nice to like follow a shepherd and trust. Trust is like a nice word. But then you realize as you start to read Psalm 23, it starts out like green pastures, still waters, restoration for our souls. And then it starts to go into the places that we would never want to go. Even paths of righteousness doesn't sound quite dark or like negative yet, except that literally means places we would not go on our own. It's that question that I asked earlier, like, did you do anything today that was purely in God's strength or that you couldn't have done without him? Those are the paths of righteousness. The places that you go that all of our flesh and our nature would never go to. To go and extend more grace when someone deeply does not deserve it, or to have boldness or courage or clarity to go and talk to somebody about Jesus and his love for them, or even just to take a different path than the path that your flesh tends to go, to turn and go a different direction. Then there's valleys of darkness, seasons of doubt, war or battles. The idea of like following Jesus, on the one hand, you're following a shepherd who has given his life for you, who is generous and compassionate, wonderful. All of those things are really awesome. But also, he was wonderful in that he went to the ends of himself to die for us. We're willing to become people that are willing to lay down our lives for others, or even just lay down our wants or our pride or our independence for the sake of being found in the shepherd and truly knowing him. And then the 4th thing is, did I have a question? No. There we go. I do have a question there. If our steps haven't required much trust in God lately, are we sure we're really following him, or are we just following our own path, hoping he'll chase us down? Super guilty in that one personally. And I almost see this whole like Psalm 23 kind of like a little roadmap or a little treasure map, and this is the one that you keep following the shepherd. He's just a few steps ahead of you, and it's full of provision and goodness, even if it goes through the craziest twists and turns, and it's scary and it's dark, but you know for a fact who you're following, and it's good. And then I know that my nature has just tended to take like right and left turns all over the place. There's a really clear path, and all I want to keep doing is go, I kind of like that path, maybe Jesus will be there too, or that one looks really scary, can I kind of turn around the other way? And I want to be continually challenged, but this is the place that I want to be. The place where I continually make him my shepherd, where I experience his goodness, where I experience his provision. But I gotta start asking myself these questions. Am I just acting like I follow him? Am I pretending to trust him? That's not even trust at all. That's actually such a lack of trust. It's distrust to go, I see where you're going, but I think my way is better. 4th thing, keep being a sheep. This is like the dumbest, simplest sermon that you could get. Be a sheep, keep being a sheep, trust and follow. But like I said, this Psalm 23 was like almost reserved for people on their deathbed. Like as you've lived this faithful life and you're being ushered into the gates of heaven, this is supposed to be so comforting. And I think to live out that Christian life, we need this comfort like daily. We don't know when that last day comes, and some days feel like it could be the last day. Like this, like it says, a valley of the shadow of death. I don't actually personally imagine that to be your last steps towards death. I imagine that to be that valley that you went through last year that felt like death. And I know I've had plenty of those and will continue to have those, so I need this in my life on a regular basis. I need to be regularly reminded that I'm just a sheep. I just have a good shepherd. Like, what more is there to know than he cares for all of my needs? He knows exactly what I want and wants to bless me in good time, and is capable of taking care of all those things. And I get to experience calling him my shepherd, not the shepherd, but my shepherd when I walk with him daily like this. And I think especially, you know, as we all love to graduate. No one wants to stay in like kindergarten for the rest of our lives. And I feel like Psalm 23 is probably feels like kindergarten Christianity. We don't want to graduate from it. But I want to challenge you, don't graduate from this. If anything, let us learn to be more like children. That's what Jesus said. You let the little children come to me, that you need to have faith like a child. This is simple, but possibly the most difficult thing to do for the rest of our lives, to keep going back to dependency, to trusting and following, because there's going to be harder things at each turn, harder and harder things to trust him with, harder and harder things to follow him through. And we always want to have this kind of temptation to become like the junior assistant shepherd, which I know like in later sermons we might talk about how we're also called to shepherd people, or say, follow me as I follow Jesus, and that's actually part of our discipleship. But there's a difference between like the person that becomes like the assistant and then they pretend like, or like teacher's aide, and they pretend like they run the class and the teacher answers to them now, versus the person that's truly there to just help. And I think that's like the biggest challenge I could give you. We don't outgrow this shepherd or this sheep position. There's not like ranking of the better sheep or the good follower sheep. I don't know what that would look like second chair sheep or something like that. But just having that relationship, that though you might be part of a flock, that it's a one-on-one relationship. It's my shepherd. And daily we need to be like stepping back into accepting him as our shepherd. And this is the challenge that I want to end the night with, is that just like it was saying in John 1:12, that those that received Jesus, he gave the right to be called children of God, that right to be called sheep of his fold. There was also in the verse before it says those that didn't receive him and that rejected him. And I think, sure, like hopefully we've all taken that opportunity to receive what he has for us and to receive him as our Lord and our shepherd once. But I think there's a lot of decisions that we make as I like went through those questions that start to point in our lives and start to reveal, have I been receiving him on a daily basis? Do I receive him into that role of shepherding and leading me? Or do I kind of on a daily basis reject that more and more and more? I'm happy to take your grace for me, God, but I don't really want your leadership. Or I'm happy to take your death for me, but I don't really want your life for me. And I think we do these small areas where maybe you've heard sermons on John 15 about remaining in him or abiding in him, that just sounds like kind of boring, like we're not doing anything, it's active. And then you just say, just obey, just obey, just obey. And it is so true. But I think it's much deeper than that we need to grasp. That every day there's conviction that comes in our hearts of places that we should go and we shouldn't go. And sometimes we make that decision get really fuzzy and we ignore it and we go, like I said, like, I'm just going to choose the easier thing. It wasn't really that I didn't choose Jesus. I wasn't choosing not to follow Jesus. I just chose the easy thing. I just didn't think twice and I went for it. You have the Holy Spirit living inside of you if you have accepted Jesus into you, that he's promised to be a helper, to be a conviction in our hearts. And I think sometimes we ignore that part of us, that there's this shepherd constantly within us kind of guiding and encouraging or correcting us, but instead inviting that more in, that he has room to move in our lives, that when he says don't go down that direction, you will find that the more that you start to listen to that, the louder it gets, the more things he's calling you into. Things that might seem stupid, Whether it's to go talk to somebody across the room and you go, why would God care if I really talk to that person specifically right there? But if you take the time to ask the question and then decide to say no, then we start to do a lot of things based on our own understanding and stop doing a lot of the things that are just because we trust God and we feel him calling us in that direction. And then there's a lot of areas that we very easily rationalize, and we say that we've got good reasons for why we're doing, or they're not that big of a deal. But coming back to, if we're just sheep and he's a good shepherd, we trust how he calls us, and trust that in order for him to be my shepherd or your shepherd, he has to be working in our lives daily. That he's not finished with us. It's not like you're like in the sheepfold and then like I'll forget about you until the day that you get to heaven and I recognize your name. But we need to be practicing learning his voice and learning more about him and responding to him more quickly, so that we build this relationship where I trust him when we go through those dark valleys that suck, that he's still so present and still moving, and I know who he is. So I don't need to know exactly what the next season looks like, or even the next week looks like, or how the heck I will have enough strength or energy to do the next week or season. But I know who he is, and that he's good, and that he's mine, and I can count on him. And that's something available to each of us. But I want to challenge you guys, I want to challenge all of us this week, that would be the way that we would follow Jesus. As a shepherd who goes just a few steps before us, who's going to protect and provide and guide and comfort and heal and all of those things, and make sure that all of the needs and the things that kind of are excuses why we don't have enough to follow him, he's already kind of quiets all of those things. He comes and he meets us, and he sees all of our insufficiencies and our lack, and he meets those, and he wants to continue to move us on towards that day when we do get to walk into heaven. But hopefully we've lived the Psalm 23 life for years and years and years and gotten to walk with that and know that he's our shepherd who we know personally, not just someone that we talk about or that a story that we've heard about before. So let me pray for us really quick. Jesus, thank you so much for your goodness and your mercy. I thank you that you are real and present. I thank you for your presence in this room right now and for your word that you speak to us. Lord, would you continue turning in our hearts? Would you continue reminding us of your truth, of your goodness and your faithfulness? God, would you give us the strength that we need, the conviction and the awareness to know when we're moving in a direction that is rejecting you? God, would you make that abundantly clear? Would you stir up our hearts to see where we leave you behind, and would we continue to be corrected and put back on paths that follow you, that even in dark valleys that you are faithful and near. And we just thank you so much for that. God, we love you. Would you receive this worship and continue working in our hearts? Amen.